Welcome back. One of President Biden's newest executive orders incorporates climate change into the mission of national security agencies. The order also calls for a climate risk analysis and a government-wide approach to the climate crisis. Sharon Burke is senior advisor at New America. She's former assistant secretary of defense for operational energy plans and programs. She's writing about the intersection between climate change and defense in Defense One. Sharon, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. I told you before we went on the air, I love reading your work because you make me think differently about things. You write this: in March 2019, a bomb hit Offutt Air Force Base, destroying a half-mile of runway and 60 buildings and inflicting more than $600 million in damage. That wasn't a kinetic bomb, though. What's the bomb you're referring to?
That was a bomb cyclone, which is a weather phenomenon where basically it's a perfect storm, right? It's ice and water and melting snow and a cyclonic storm all coming over together and forming what is called a bomb cyclone. So it has a big impact where it hits.
You write about two main reasons that climate change is important to consideration in the national security community. The first, you write, scores of military installations around the world are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, from droughts to floods to fires. How has that changed over the past, say, decade? And what do we know, or what do we anticipate about how it would change in, say, the coming decade?
Well, all of those impacts are getting worse. And everybody in this country has seen that storms that you didn't see very often, now you're seeing every couple of years. So that affects bases, military bases, just like it does everyone else. A lot of these bases are littoral, they're on the coastline, so they're vulnerable to storm surge, to coastal storms, and to those kinds of floods. That's a particular problem. And then there are bases in a lot of arid areas where droughts and sudden flash floods are a huge problem as well. All of those events are increasing, and they will continue to increase. The volatility of weather patterns is rising.
I want to talk about one of those areas in particular in a moment, but the second item that you write about is climate change is increasingly shaping the Defense Department's role in protecting the nation's security in direct and indirect ways. You didn't use the word already there in reference to President Biden's climate change executive order, but I heard it when I read it. Am I hearing you right?
I'm sorry, can you clarify what your question is?
This is a challenge that the nation's been dealing with for a period of time, and President Biden's climate change EOs, as I read your piece, are addressing the issue that we're already dealing with rather than previewing something that we can expect to see in the future. Is that fair to say?
It's both, actually. So we are already seeing the effects of climate change. And when I said direct and indirect, so direct is that effect on the bases. And, bases are certainly where American forces live and where they work, where they train, where they have to get ready. But it's also increasingly where we're directly conducting military operations from, whether that's unmanned systems or other kinds of information warfare. These are very important places for us around the country, in every state in the union and also overseas. So the fact that they are already experiencing an increase in volatile weather impacts is a problem. It's going to get worse. And it's going to get worse no matter what happens with cutting greenhouse gas emissions, because a certain amount of this change is already locked in. So these things are already happening, and they're going to get worse. If we don't succeed in limiting our greenhouse gas emissions, they will get much worse over time. So it's both. It's both what's already happened and a preview of what's to come.
I want to come back to the greenhouse gas concept in a moment, because you wrap your piece with that. But the theater of operations I was referring to a moment ago is the Arctic. And we've seen tremendous difficulty with the Coast Guard in having presence in the Arctic. At the same time, Russia and China both are ramping up operations in that part of the world. How should issues like the ice melt in the Arctic and the other climate issues that you've discussed influence the way that we think about the shape of the military, the shape of the national security apparatus, the inventory of equipment, all of that in the coming years, Sharon?
So that's on the mission side of the impacts. There's two different kinds of impacts there. One is there are missions like, the U.S. Armed Forces are very active in humanitarian and disaster relief, whether it's at home, where they're supporting civil authorities, or around the world, where we're helping partners or allies, or, anytime the State Department says we need to help, our forces go. That kind of mission is increasing. So that's a direct, correlation for the Department of Defense, and they need to incorporate that into their planning for the future. But it's the indirect impact that's potentially really huge, because as you said, with the Arctic and around the world, climate change is having a dramatic effect. It's melting glaciers, it's changing water supplies, it's inflicting droughts all over the world, whether that's the Himalayas, where 1 billion people live in the shadow of the Himalayas, China, India, strategic partners, competitors. It affects all of them. How that's going to affect the balance, the stability of nations is really important, and it really comes to a head in the Arctic. The Arctic has been, locked in with ice for most of human history, but climate change is melting that ice. And for the first time, we're going to have a navigable ocean up there in the Arctic Ocean. And, Russia has a very long Arctic coastline and a lot of valuable real estate up there. The United States has a long Arctic coastline. And then we have 4 NATO allies that are on the littoral. So China is building its third heavy icebreaker and has a very keen interest in that polar route. It cuts 2 weeks off of the time between Asia and Europe. That is a very valuable change for them. And then it also opens up a lot of natural resources that were just simply not accessible before, because that is one harsh environment up there. But it's melting and it's changing the game. And it's bringing all the nations together in that place. And, of course, that's ironic, because it also means that these changes are hard upon us. And this is a fact. This is something you can see with satellites, with sonar buoys. This is not an opinion or a mathematical model. This is an observation that the Arctic is melting, and it is changing the geopolitics of that region for sure.
Sharon Burke, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here as always.